All right, welcome guys. We've got Mark, we've got Andy, we've got Marina, myself. We're just going to take a look at some common Selenium challenges and how we as a team, as individuals, will probably look to address them with both Ruby and JavaScript. So I'd say we kill the cameras and over to you, Marina.
Yes. So let me just share my screen. So firstly, the problem that I will be addressing in Selenium is to verify that element is no longer present within the web page. And the reason why this is a bit of a problem is that Selenium has many helpful methods and functions to clarify if a method is present, displayed on the web page, but sometimes we want to know that an element isn't being displayed, and these methods and functions available to us will not so helpfully raise an error and cause our test to fail if they don't locate an element. So this is a solution to that. So we can confirm that an element is no longer present on the web page. And the first thing I'm going to do is manually show you what the test will be doing. So I've used the test evolve homepage because I know our website works, but hopefully I'm not going to jinx it. So on the homepage at the very bottom, we have this cookies banner. And if we press that X, it disappears. So my tests are going to do just that. Then let's start with Selenium JavaScript then. So I've got these 3 very simple steps in this scenario. So I go to the home page, I accept the cookies in the pop-up, and the cookies pop-up should disappear. So that's the 3 steps that this test is going to take. And if I click into those, in this last step, that's where I want to verify that the element is no longer present within the web page. And you can see that I've got 2 very similarly named methods, and that's because I've actually got 2 solutions to this problem. And I will explain a little along the way as to why I think one is better than the other.
Cool. And can you zoom in a touch, Marina, if possible?
Yes, of course.
Nice one. Thank you.
How's that?
Yeah, great. Thanks.
Cool. So I think the first thing I should do is make the test fail. And so then we know that when it passes, there's no false pass at play. And we know that the test is working as it should. So let's say I don't accept the cookies. So I don't press that little X on the pop-up. This test should pass. Sorry, it should fail.
Yeah, cool.
And this is quite a common problem, isn't it? Because you need to know that certain elements have disappeared before you can start interacting with other elements on the page. For example, if you've got like a warning modal that you expect to appear, and then you need it to disappear because it's overlaying the entire page and that kind of thing.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, it's failed. The cookies pop-up should not be visible. So that's an error message that I've created myself. We'll look into that in a minute. But what I will do is confirm that these tests work. These methods work. So hopefully this passes. So yeah, the test is passed. And we've even got this extra bit of info logged to the terminal. The cookies pop-up is no longer visible. And so that would be both of these methods passing. So I'm going to step into the first one and explain what's happening inside of that. So we've got this helper function here called check element not present. And we pass into that the element, an error message, and a console log message. And the element we're passing in is accept cookies button. So that's the button we click to make the pop-up disappear. And so if the button's not going to be there, the pop-up isn't going to be there either. So we're just passing that in. And inside this helper function, that's where we call our Selenium function method is displayed on that element that we're passing in. So as mentioned previously, if this method, if the element isn't present, this method usually will raise an error and the test will fail. So what I've got wrapped around it is a try catch block, and we're catching the no such element error that it would raise in that event, so that it continues to run the code in this if condition. So it'll catch the error when it doesn't find the element, and found will equals true. And so at the end here, if found equals true, we will raise the error that we're passing in. And so this way, we catch the error and we can continue to use the information that the element is no longer present. And so the test passes. And we also, if it is present, if it isn't present, it will run this catch block and will console log the console log message, which is cookies pop-up is no longer visible. So instead of leaving that empty, we're giving the tester a bit more information about what's going on. And the only issue with this approach, it works, but Selenium does apply an implicit wait time on this method is displayed. So it allows for a certain period of time for the element to be found in the web page. And as we know that the element shouldn't be there, we know that it's going to be using that the entire amount of wait time available. And so it's using it's adding on a lot of time to our test that doesn't need to be added on. And so that is the purpose of my next solution that I'm going to show you.
Cool. Quick question,
Yes.
Marina, right? So you mentioned that you've got this tucked away in a helpers file, right?
Yeah.
So I guess one of the benefits for that is that you can then access this code kind of from anywhere within the code base on any page against any element that you wanted to run a similar check for. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. The way it's set up is that it could be used in many different instances, and it reduces the amount of repeated code, and it is just one of the benefits of using test evolve as well, is that we can utilize these helper functions throughout the code base to keep it cleaner. So yeah, it's exactly as you say.
Cool. And the in your catch block, right? So you're obviously specifying a certain Selenium error there, right? The specific thing that this is designed to pick up. I guess that's pretty important to lock down on that particular type of error, right? Would there be a risk if we just kind of went for a standard error or something?
I suppose the risk is the test could fail for another reason.
Right.
We would want to know about that reason.
Yeah.
And linters, they often can be set up to pick up on these things as well. So it is definitely best practice for sure to specify the exact error you want to catch. Gotcha. And in this case, we know exactly the error we want to catch quite helpfully. Yeah. So, we can be very specific about it.
Yeah, cool. Okay, thank you.
So yeah, I'll just show you the second solution then, and it's much simpler than the previous one. So instead of, we've got our element here, accept cookies button, which uses the find element Selenium function to locate that element based on the selector. So instead of using that, we're using the find elements Selenium function to create a collection of elements. And so the selector is the exact same, but here you can see it's plural. So that utilizes find elements Selenium function to create a collection. And although we would only ever expect one of these elements to be present, it will still wrap it up in that array that we can utilize. And the benefit of this is that when you're creating a collection, if it can't find any elements related to this selector, it won't fail, it won't raise an error. Instead, it will just give you an empty array. So that's exactly what we're utilizing here. It calls the element collection, and it's checking that array, it's checking the length of the array. And if it's over 0, then it throws an error. But we expect it to be 0 because we expect it to return no elements within that collection.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does. I picked up on something as well in your the way you defined your collections, your element definitions. I noticed you've used a class star equals. Is there a particular reason for that?
Yes. So that means that you don't have to refer to all of the classes that are assigned to a specific element.
Okay.
So you can shorten the amount of text available.
Right. Like
the text present.
match. Yeah.
Exactly.
Match. Cool.
Yeah.
It's really useful because with things like Tailwind, now you've got multiple class names being applied to every element. So, just make this red and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So rather than specify all of them, you want to specify something unique. I mean, obviously class isn't the best one to use all the time, but sometimes it's the only option.
Yeah. Gotcha.
Cool.
You mentioned you preferred the second one then, Marina. What's the preference for the second one? What's the benefits?
So it's much quicker. So where inside, I briefly touched upon it, but where inside this, the first solution we use is helper function with the try catch block. And we're calling is displayed. So Selenium has applied an implicit wait time to this is displayed method. And because we know the element's not going to be there, this will utilize the entire implicit wait time every time we run the test. Whereas with this second solution, it just looks at the web page and then it will check. So this doesn't wait for anything. It just checks the web page and it collects the elements as it is in its current state. So we can check almost immediately if that element is present or is not present by checking the length of the array returned.
Okay, cool.
So that's the key difference between the two. I also have it in Ruby.
Yeah, let's take a look.
Let's have a quick look. And how do we zoom in on? Do you need me to zoom in on Ruby?
It should just, it should be a pinch and zoom, hopefully.
Control plus. I'm not sure. So yeah, control plus is not working.
Yeah, no, don't worry, not a problem.
So can you see the code all right in this?
Yeah, at the moment, yeah.
In Ruby mine?
Yeah,
cool.
Yeah.
In that case, so we've got the 3 steps here, and this is exactly the same as it is in JavaScript version at this level. There's no differentiation between languages. So I'll step in. So again, we've got our 2 methods. The only real difference here is obviously we've got snake case, and Ruby is not asynchronous. So that's not something we have to worry about in Ruby.
Yeah, that is without trying to sell one language over the other, that is a nice aspect of using something like Ruby, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely one less thing to think about.
Yeah.
And then stepping into the page, it's as you can see, it's laid out very similarly, minus the asynchronicity aspect. We've got the first solution, with a helper method. And again, we are using rescue here in Ruby, and we're rescuing a specific error. And we're using dot present as opposed to is displayed here. And I believe it's dot present is a water wrapper, is it? Or is that?
Yeah, that's right. So water is a wrapper that goes around Selenium in our Ruby version of Test Evolve, and it provides helpful functions basically. So obviously you had is displayed in the JavaScript version, but yeah, present is kind of a very similar thing. I think it means it doesn't have to be visible, but it has to exist on the page. I think
there's a few kind of similar variations, aren't there? Dot enabled, dot visible, dot present, dot exists. They're all things that can
dot obscured.
Slightly different focus for different reasons at different times in the test. But I guess we probably use dot present more than most things, I guess.
Yeah. I thought of another reason why you wouldn't want to catch a standard error as well. You want a specific one, because if someone made an edit to this and then misspelled present, for example, you probably would get an exception, but it wouldn't be the one you actually wanted to show that an element wasn't present. It would just be, this method doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And then the test would pass, even though perhaps the cookie message is still there.
Yeah. That's actually slightly more readable, isn't it? I think on line 5, rescue Selenium WebDriver error, no such element error. There's more to it than you saw in JavaScript.
There's no ambiguity, is there?
Yeah.
Much more clarity.
Yeah.
So yeah, I suppose that's another difference between the two languages. And looking at the second solution in Ruby, so as the framework's slightly different, once again, we've got a water wrapper around our elements here. So we just have to make buttons plural to create our collection. And that's what I'm calling here, and then getting the length of it. As it's not asynchronous, we can do this all on one line. But other than that, it works the same. I will run it. I believe generally Ruby does run slightly quicker than the JavaScript.
Pretty controversial there, Marina. I'm not sure.
Well, we can see. I think
I'll have to see what people think.
we might have the times logged in the terminal.
So now you're on Ruby 2.7 as well. So we're about to move to Ruby 3 very, very soon, which actually brings a number of performance benefits as well. So it really should be faster at that point. But again, how much of this do we really notice in test automation terms? Yeah, I'm not sure. The jury's out, isn't it? I think you still, at the end of the day, you're dealing with your web application. You've got to wait for the state of the app.
Yeah, and you want it to be as end user like as possible. So if a user has to wait, then the test should have to wait. And it's the testing pyramid, right, James?
Yeah, exactly. One thing I have noticed, and I've seen it pretty much the same in the examples that I'm going to run through in a second as well, is line for line, it's kind of equal, isn't it? It's not, there's often a bit of a myth that maybe JavaScript is that much more verbose compared to something like Ruby or Python, but actually in some of these examples, that's probably proving not to be true, I think.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Cool. All right, what are we doing? Are we going to run this one? Did that run?
It did run. So quick you didn't even notice.
There you go.
It took 6 seconds. Let's see if this says it took.
We're executing steps 15 seconds.
15 seconds, yeah.
Well, that's conclusive then. I think we've proven that beyond any doubt.
Yeah.
I'm sticking to Ruby. Not like I needed convincing anyway, right?
Until Python comes along, and that's
well. There you go. Nice, Marina. All right. Anything else to kind of comment on, or?
No, I think that pretty much covers it. Unless you guys have any more questions for me.
No, I've definitely fired you mine along the way.
Yeah.
Andy, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I was just going to say, yeah, good example. The cookies banner is a very common appearance in web testing, which is good. But I was sort of wondering what problems does it bring up in tests? Because I guess it doesn't stop you interacting with the rest of the page like a modal or an iframe. But I guess it just being there and present, there's a chance that it could obscure some of the elements that you're trying to actually test. So best practice is just get rid of the cookies banner and avoid any problems later on, kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. In terms of the test itself, it could, if the cookies banner did not disappear, it could intercept other element clicks. Perhaps not on our homepage so much because it's right at the bottom, but sometimes cookie pop-ups are right in the middle of the screen. So it does benefit the tester to know if that modal has disappeared or not. But I suppose as just an end user using the application as well, it'd be quite annoying if it just never disappeared from the screen. I'm sure it would interfere with the user experience somewhat.
I think there's a couple of things, right, as well. So there's the kind of the concept that you guys are talking around, which is the need to get something out of the way to carry on with your test, with navigating through the app, etc., and making sure that works. But I think there's also a time when actually it's a very specific assertion that you're looking to make. It's an important part of the way the app works. For example, if I'm doing something with payment, or I've got a kind of a critical thing, there's a pop-up on my screen, and it's kind of yes or green tick to continue, and it's red or cross to kind of cancel that modal and go back to where it was. And if you've got a test that's engineered around checking the cancel function of that modal, the thing you absolutely want to make sure that happens is that modal disappears, right? So yes, it's part of the navigation and the success of the rest of the test, but it could actually be the focal point of the test as well, making sure, the absence of something. That makes sense?
Yes. Yeah, I agree.
Nice. Cool. All right. Thanks, Marina. Shall I jump in?
Yes.
And did you have anything else before I cut you off there? Sorry.
No, that was it. Yeah. I think we covered most.
Right. Cool. I shall jump in. We might have some screen inception to start with, so let me know when you can see.
Yeah, we can see.
Cool. All right. And I should be zoomed in as well. So yeah, excellent. Thank you. So like Marina, well, probably for all of us, we're always going to start with a feature scenario. So we use Cucumber, we use BDD. I'm focusing on how to iterate through a container or a collection of objects. And again, there could be a few reasons for doing this. We're going to focus heavily today on looking at a shopping cart on Amazon, for example, any kind of e-commerce website. I've got another example of where this would be prevalent on any kind of table within a web page. So we've got a table with kind of users and permissions and that kind of thing. But it's all focused around the fact that coming back to the basket, the e-commerce basket, if you load multiple items to that basket, you've got no real way of knowing the sequence of those items. And there could be a variety of things you want to do. You want to check that firstly, all of those things are in the cart. You might want to assert against individual items within the cart. You might want to retrieve information from all of the items in the cart collectively, or you might want to seek and find a particular item within that cart. Again, all without really knowing exactly where things are. And that could change from each time you run the test. The sequence could be different. So it's quite a useful thing that comes up quite a lot. So yeah, here's our scenario. Essentially, when I add multiple items to my cart, then I can iterate through them all in the basket. So we'll look at the Ruby version. All right, we're going to go ahead and play the Ruby test. So I'll just get myself to the Amazon login page first of all. TNC. All right, so what should be happening? You can see the banner at the bottom there, so we should clear the banner. We're then going to search for 3 different products. We're going to search for them. We're going to pick a matching result from the product listings page. That'll take us to the PDP, or the product details page, and then we'll add to basket from that page, and then we'll repeat that for the next 2 products.
I suppose what you normally want to do is, if you're adding lots of products to a basket and your test is just specifically testing the basket, you could actually do it through the API and speed up the test quite a lot, as long as you had a specific test that checks that a user could add to the basket.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, anything where you've got a lot of setup effectively, which is what we have here, is a perfect example of where you can use that to good effect. Even more so, obviously, if you're building your own application, you have a good awareness of what firstly, what the APIs are, how you make use of them. And I think we mentioned the kind of pyramid earlier, right? The automation pyramid, but you're going to want to have a good solid layer of API tests within your automation framework anyhow. So yeah, very, very good point. All right, so that's run, that's passed. Excellent. Let's just look at some of the output from this, right? Because the point of showing you the iteration was for different reasons, right? It's about how we can extract information. It's about how we can assert against certain things, and how we can target something specifically within a cart or within a table, effectively, where we don't know for certain where something's going to be. All right, so let's just step through the output of this. So as it was going through, and we'll look at the code in a second, but we can see here, right? So picked on the first product, it says the price of the such and such a product is X pounds, right? And then it's doing the same thing for the second product, doing the same thing for the third product. We can see here then it's kind of tallying up, and it's giving me some information on the number of items in my cart. And then just for good measure, slightly more technical output is giving me the array that I was using to do all of this stuff, and kind of outputting that as a string, so I can see products and prices just as a collection, as an array. And then this will become apparent in a minute. So this was where I was targeting something specific within the basket, but I didn't know where it was. So I'm able to supply a search term and say, go and find me this thing, no matter where it is in the basket, and tell me something about this thing. So that's kind of the output of the test. So if we step into the code and see how it is we're doing that. So like Marina did earlier, I'm going to step into the then step. In kind of Cucumber terms, we're within the middle layer of the framework now. This is our step dev file. There's kind of 3 things going on here. This was me clicking to load the basket. The second thing then is me preparing an argument that I'm going to pass through in my in the method that follows. Okay, so I'm just declaring an array of 3 items that I am expecting as part of this test will be in that cart, and it's going to form the basis of my test as we move forward. So I kind of refer to those as my expected results. I pass those through as an argument to this method, iterate through my basket, which we'll now find on my my page object model page class, which is the basket page in my automation framework. All right, so let's have a look at that. So a few different things going on here. We received this argument, of course. First thing I'm doing is declaring an empty array for which I'm going to load it full of the products that I find as I iterate through using WebDriver. I actually start by, again, as a concept that Marina talked about, using a collection of objects. So we would have seen a loaded cart page. We would have seen 3 things within there, one above the other. And they all had this kind of common class aspect. They all had a div with a class of this attribute here. So I can refer to that as a collection. And what that then allows me to do is to iterate through them. All right, so I do that by using my element name, so all items for each thing in that. As I'm looking at the first thing, the second thing, the third thing, however many things there are, each one I'm going to refer to it as item in turn. What I wanted to do was extract 2 bits of information from any of the products in that cart as I iterated through. I wanted to grab effectively the product header, and I then wanted to grab the price as well. So one of the first things we see here is this idea of element chaining with WebDriver, or kind of expanding upon our initial collection here. So we're looking, for example, at the first item, and we then say dig a little deeper and find a span with a class that has this attribute here. So you can see you can see what it's focusing on here, the product title. And then I'm calling the .text method that we get from Ruby, from Water. And then I'm doing a similar thing with the price, albeit with looking for a div this time. So expanding that collection, that first item in the collection, looking for a div, a descendant of it with a class that includes this attribute price to pay. And again, I'm grabbing the text at that point. Okay. So the first thing I'm doing to make use of those is then outputting that to the console. So I'm saying the price of the such and such product is X, Y, or Z, whatever it is. So that's the code there that's generating this line here. So this is just a good example of how you can use this idea of element chaining, descendants, looking through the DOM to extract further information which may be useful to your test moving forwards. All right, so that's how we do that. The next thing I was doing, again, iterating through each of those products in the cart. Each one of them should have, there's two fundamental things. It has a picker where you can change the value or the quantity of that particular item in your cart. We've been adding one at a time, but if I then want to make it, two calculators, I could do that there. Equally, if I want to delete that calculator from my cart, there should be a delete button within each of those rows, within each of these divs in my collection. Okay, so again, I've taken this idea of expansion or element chaining. I'm saying raise an error referring to the particular product in question. Raise an error unless this span with a class that has this action delete attribute, unless it's present. Okay, so it's just an example of how you can raise an assertion whilst you're iterating through the products in a cart, or again, I'll come back to the point, this could be a table, right? So I'll show you a couple of other examples. The unless, this is a nice thing we can do with Ruby, but we can't do a similar thing with JavaScript, so we'll look at the alternative in a second. I write both of those variables to my captured products array, and then I did some further output here. So once it's been through everything, it took my array, divided the length or the size in Ruby terms by 2. Bearing in mind, I've been adding product headers and prices for every single product. So actually, pseudocode, I just wanted to divide this by 2 so it would tell me how many items I had in my cart. This is what we see here. All right, so there are 3 actual items in your basket, even though I'd added 12 bits of information to my array. Okay, and then we saw that I outputted everything that was within the array itself. So I just did that by a string of my choosing plus captured products. That's an array converted to string, and that's why we see what we see here. So again, just to show you how you can extract some information, push it to console, and then that may be of use moving forward. The next thing I did is probably the slightly more complicated bit within the code. There's a couple of things going on here, right? But the first thing I wanted to show you was making sure that each of my expected results, again, it could be in any sequence, I supplied them in a particular order, but I want to check my expected results with what's actually found in the actual results. And the reason I'm doing this is because if I just step back here, the things that I supplied here are not exact matches for what WebDrive is actually returning me. Okay, so for example, what I mean here, if we look at the array from our actual results, we had a kind of a full lengthy string like this for our calculator, but actually I'm just supplying a search term of calculator, so I want to be able to check that that's within the array. So I'm doing a couple of things here. Okay, so again, iterating. Now this is not a WebDriver thing at this point. I'm really looking at the arrays that I've created as part of doing this. But so I'm going to iterate through my expected results. For each one of those expected results, I'm going to refer to it as an item to check. I'm going to set my counter to 0. And then I'm going to go through the captured products, or my array of captured products. And those things I'm going to refer to as product. Okay. And I'm simply going to say if the product, i.e. this thing in blue down here, if this big long string here includes the item that I want to check, which in this case was just the word calculator, so we can see that that would be found here. And all we're going to do in that case is increment that counter by 1. All right, it's just a simple way of looking for string within a string, if you like. And I'm just going to say there, once it's done all of that, it's been through all of my expected results, and it's been through all of the actual results and made that determination. We would simply raise an error if my counter had not been incremented from 0 to at least 1. Okay, so basket did not include the item that I wish to check for unless my counter is greater than 0. All right, and then the final thing I'm doing, so this is a good example of where you want to target something specific, but again, you don't know where it is in the sequence of products in the cart. All right, so we're retrieving product-specific data without knowing its location. So I'm declaring the thing that I want to check. So item to check is calculator, all right? And then I'm going through all of the my collection of WebDriver elements. Right? I'm going to go through all of these. So all items dot each do. Again, I'm going to refer to each one of those as item, and I'm going to use the header here, and I'm going to look at the text, and I'm going to ask it, does it include the thing that I'm looking for? Right. So it looks at the first thing in the cart, and it says, right, do you have a product title and the text of which includes, in this case, calculator? So that could be the first thing in the cart. It could be the third. I don't know. But if and when that that condition is true, I'm then I'm outputting a string here. So I'm then going to say, right, calculator price equals. But at that same time, I'm also extracting the relevant price where it's found the thing I'm looking for. It's found my calculator string within either the first, the second, or the third product. And then at that point, I then, again, using this descendant idea, I then go and say, right, in that case, the price must be this. Okay, so that's an example of where you can find something specific, passing through the criteria and argument. You can use that iteration to then hone in on the thing that you're looking for without knowing exactly where it is. All right.
So all items is effectively a table
Yes.
or a collection of rows.
Yep.
In this case, it's divs. A collection of rows, and then each item inside is an individual row. Yeah, and then I really like what Water's doing here. So obviously, Water is a wrapper for Selenium, and so you can select say what type of element you're looking for. So .span, for example. Yeah, here you go. So each row is a div with a particular class, and then inside that, you're then looking for a span, and it could be multiple layers in deep, but it's using find element, and it's going, where is a span with this particular thing?
Exactly.
Or a link.
Yeah, exactly that. And it's using that element, that idea of element chaining, because we know that the price I'm trying to get for a given product is a descendant of, where I'm currently looking. So exactly that. But yeah, so you can see as you start to inspect things at this level, these are just rows, but there's several layers deep, as you say. What I wanted to show as well is just another way of looking at this. All right, so this is our Halo application, our test environment, but again, it's just a table, right? But a similar concept. It's like products in a bag. These are users with permissions and other attributes. But it works in exactly the same way as I expand these. Each one of these are divs with classes. If I expand these, and I can start to hone in on certain aspects of that row.
That's probably a really good example, isn't it? Because you might want to automate deleting multiple users in this table. So you'd want to loop through them, iterate through them exactly the way you did in your code, and then select delete within that. Yeah,
exactly. You could pass in fact, and I think we see this on this page, right? If you make changes on this page, the sequence of users will possibly change. So there may be a specific user. In fact, we do that as part of our regression testing, of course, right? We're targeting a specific user in order to make changes, either to manipulate those checkboxes or to do something different in the projects picker or to delete them, as you say. But in order to do that, you can't just rely on picking the first one every time, assuming that that's going to be the thing that you want, because it's more often than not, it won't be. So you've got to iterate through these rows, whatever this is, a cart or a table with users, until you find the thing that you want, until you find your matching kind of search criteria. Yeah, so kind of two examples of what we're talking about here, same kind of thing.
You've used the dot include method. Is there an argument in some cases to do an exact match instead, just in case there was two different calculators added to the list?
Yeah,
there could be a bit of a risk around the dot include.
Yeah, exactly. You know, you could argue that a better way of me doing this would be to pass through the things that I knew that WebDriver would extract as the product header could be the things that I pass through here. So, you know, after I first developed this test and I know what WebDriver is going to extract and give me by way of a product header, I could then pass as an expected result as I'm developing my test. So yes, you could do that, and in that case, you could still use .include for that, or of course you could say equals the certain thing that you're looking for. So yeah, absolutely. This works to a degree, of course. You know, I'm looking for a photo frame, I'm looking for a clothes error, and I'm looking for a calculator, right? So this still has to be true for my test to pass, of course. But to your point, this is what I'd call a slightly more forgiving assertion. Do we say where is that code? It's down here, isn't it? Yeah, because as you say, all we're checking is that these long strings down here, as you say, there could be two calculators in there, right? And my counter is going to increment more than one time. It's going to go 1, 2, 3 if there were 3 different calculators. So in that situation, if I knew that I were adding similar products where that could be a risk, then I wouldn't do this kind of text.include method. I'd make it more specific, and I would pass through more accurate expected results, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Cool. All right, let's have a quick look at the JavaScript version. I'm not going to run the test again because it's going to do exactly the same thing, right? But let's just look at how similar this is. I made the point earlier. Actually, I was pleasantly surprised that the JavaScript to implement this was not as verbose as you sometimes think JavaScript's going to be. So this is all going to look kind of similar. All right, so this is me navigating or opening the cart again. Within JavaScript, we're typically using more native Selenium commands. Same thing here, right? I'm declaring my expected results. Obviously, we have to declare that let expected results. It's not something we have to do in Ruby, so small difference there. And of course, again, as Marina's mentioned, the asynchronous side of things. All right, so I have to await this iterate through my basket function. I'm still passing it through my expected results. All right, so there's a few things that are a little bit different here, but it's almost, I guess it's more the things we're declaring. I'm taking a slightly different approach to iterate through this. So it's useful to see two different approaches, I think, but the end results are exactly the same. So I still declare my captured products array. This is how I am, again, declaring that collection of elements. So using find elements plural, still using the same attributes that we were using for Ruby with a CSS link for a class. I'm just defining a few things here, right? So what I'm doing here that's slightly different, rather than iterating through each product in the cart, I'm actually using a kind of a timer concept, a counter concept. So the first thing I'm going to do once I've declared that collection, I'm just counting the number of things, the number of matching elements that WebDriver has recorded. Okay, slightly different version of the length there. So I think Marina was calling .length. This is another way of effectively doing the same thing. I declare my counter as 0. I set link text and I set price. And then what I'm doing here is effectively saying, for as long as my counter is less than my times declaration, so that we know here that there are kind of 3 things there. So whilst counter is 0, 1, 2, whilst it's less than 3, then it's gonna, and this is the means of iterating in this case. So the idea, the same thing, I'm still extracting 2 things, link text and price. I have to await this every time. But what I'm doing here is slightly different, is passing in that counter. So first time it's going to say all items, my collection, using an index of 0. And then find element, this is that concept of element chaining, if you like, as we were doing in Ruby, but by CSS with class. And again, this is, you'll recall from the Ruby example, this is me extracting the product header using the getText function in JavaScript. All right, so I do exactly the same thing to get the price. And then you'll remember the next thing I was doing was outputting both of those within a string to the console, just to show how we can extract some information. I would definitely say the next thing is an example of where JavaScript is a tad more verbose. So just the idea of wanting to raise a basic error message. You'll recall that this was just to do with if that item in the cart didn't have a delete button, I wanted to raise an error. Okay, so that would iterate through 3 times. If the first one didn't have a delete button, it would throw an error and the test would fail at that point. If the third one didn't have an error, didn't have a delete button, it would fail at that point. But yeah, this is definitely slightly more complicated. We had the unless option in Ruby. All right, we don't have that in JavaScript. So what I'm having to do, I'm using the Selenium, the isDisplayed function that I can call. So we're looking at the 0 index, the first item, and I'm extending that to look for an element CSS with class of action delete. But because I can only say if, I can't say unless in JavaScript, I'm saying I've got an exclamation mark there just to say if it is not displayed effectively. And then I'm throwing my error here. So slightly more verbose than the Ruby equivalent. But that's really one of the only examples I've seen so far, to be honest. I'm then writing these things individually to the captured products array. I'm bumping my counter, and then it's going to go through that 3 times for the 3 products. Nothing really different here. This is where we're just logging the number of items in my array or in my basket. And then just the equivalent of how I write that array to string to console. And then this was actually very similar as well. This was where I was iterating through to make sure that my expected results could be found within those actions. So actually very, very similar at that point. All right, so I just set my counter here, expected results for each, and then each thing that it finds, I'm referring to it as item to check. I set a secondary counter. Oh, sorry, I set that counter, I give it a value. And then within each of those expected results, it's going to look for it as a snippet within that longer string that we saw. All right, so much the same. Yeah, so kind of useful when you're looking to iterate through a cart or a table, you know, anything as we say. Either you're looking to extract information, you're looking to make some definite assertions that things are either there or they're not there. You're looking to check that multiple things, you know, the number of things is right within a container. You're looking to make an assertion against a specific thing by passing an argument and then finding that thing within the list, not knowing where it's going to be. So yeah, very common Selenium challenge, but a couple of useful examples of how you can do that through Ruby and JavaScript. So yeah, I'm using Ruby 2.7.4 right now. We are using Water within Ruby as well. That's the library that we talked about. I'm using Node version 18 right now. And one of the key differences there, we're using more native Selenium commands. Okay, I'd say one of the main things for me personally is the ability to debug. And you can do that nicely in Ruby. You can pause, you can inspect, you can check element state, and you don't have that same option in JavaScript, so we do a lot of console.log, but yeah, are effectively running a test in its entirety and then checking the console output to determine the certain state of certain things. So I would say I personally find the process of writing tests from scratch in Ruby a little bit easier than in JavaScript. But yeah, there you go. Any questions?
Yeah, I guess so. It's a good skeleton bit of code, so I guess you could use it to iterate through any collection of divs and pretty much find out whatever you wanted. I know you're checking for the delete button in this case, but you could change to say .enabled, for instance, and look to see if certain items in the div had different buttons enabled, and you could make it a lot more complicated. But I think this is just a really good skeleton of sort of how a lot of the div collections work, and it gives you a thing to go off to start checking your own stuff. So yeah, just wanted to
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just to extend it slightly further, there, whilst we're considering these as just 3 kind of repeating rows or divs, as you say, if you to kind of extend this concept, you might pass through some arguments, and you might target a certain things, and maybe thinking on the top of my head here, but maybe for my calculator in there, maybe there's another option that I expect to have within that row. That is only going to be present for the calculator, that wouldn't be present for the picture frame, for example. So, but it's just that concept of iterating through these items, finding the thing that you're interested in without knowing definitely where it is every time. As I say, that calculator right now, it's the second thing in there, right? Next time I run this test, it could be top of the basket. Time after that, it could be the bottom of the basket. So you've got to have code that can work around that. All right. What you don't want to have to do is attempt to write code that always assumes the calculator is going to be in the first position every time, because it's not going to be like that. And regardless whether that's an Amazon cart or whether it's more of a kind of admin function like this, the concept is still the same effectively.
Yep.
And I suppose as well, through the method of iterating through a collection and then chaining elements within that, you can find elements relating to specific information within the parent element. So
yes, yep.
The Halo example, as you were saying, you can delete specific users as opposed to giving it an index. You could have a collection of the delete buttons and give it an index to delete, click that delete button. But as you say, the order will change as well. So
yeah, absolutely. We use the dot parent concept quite a lot as well. That's very useful at times where you have a more definitive ID for effectively what you consider to be a child element. You've got a more definitive ID that you can hook into. You can find that more easily, and then you can say dot parent to climb up a couple of levels, and then you can drop down again to find a different span or a different Lee or whatever it is you're looking for. But yeah, it's all around having something solid that you can hook into. As Mark said earlier, we use class if we have to, but if we had a data underscore test or an ID, we'd much rather use that. But you've got to work with what you got, right? So, yeah, nice. Okay. All right, good. Mark, I think we'll cut to you.
Cool. I'll share my screen. So one of the most common Selenium issues that I've seen is things being in the way of something you want to interact with effectively. So I'd like to show a couple of examples and then look into how we deal with them. But yeah, there are some crazy mobile websites at the moment. They look fine on desktop, but then as soon as you switch to mobile view, there's pop-ups and there's adverts, there's cookie messages, just everything. So let me navigate to an example. So I love football.london, the website, I really do, but the mobile site is just unacceptable. So if I clear the cookies message, so straight away you can see there's this element here, which I believe takes you to a different site. You've got the privacy ad at the bottom, you've got a notification alert. When you scroll up, you have a header that floats over the top. So all of these things, when you're automating a site, all of these things can cause you issues, because if something is covering it even slightly, a user will not be able to click on that thing, and therefore using Selenium, you will not be able to click on that thing, and you'll get an element intercepted error. And there's lots of examples of this. We see it on our website all the time. Andy, you had an issue recently, didn't you, with exactly that?
Yeah, we were using toast notifications on our site, which appeared in the top right, where we also had a user drop-down menu. So sometimes the toast notifications were obscuring the drop-down menu, and we were getting some failing tests. So hopefully you'll be able to show us one way we could deal with those shortly.
Yeah, so as Andy says, we saw it last night. Here's an example right here, actually, from our test run. This is in our Halo reporting platform, but you can see element click intercepted. We can see the button we were trying to click on, the point we were trying to click on it, and actually a completely different button was in the way. So another element would have received the click.
Yeah.
Fortunately for us, this is the first time it's happened, so we'll have to look into it and investigate. But let's take a look at some of the ways we can potentially fix that. So I created a basic example of something you might see, a very crude example, but effectively there's an annoying element that is in the way of something we want to click. So in this example, as soon as the click me button is available, as a user, I'm able to interact with it. I can click it, and the text at the top of the screen will change to button was clicked. So yeah, very basic example. This could be something like a toast notification, as Andy says, some kind of modal that is still present, or a loading screen with a spinner.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I've created a test. As James mentioned the other day, we always use BDD. So in this case, Cucumber and Ruby, using Ruby 3, Selenium 4.11, and Appium 2 to drive the device here. So I've got my 3 steps here. The first one is just going to the demo page that I've created. The second one will be me trying to click on the button that's underneath the div. And the third is checking that the text has been updated to button was clicked, which will show that the button has successfully been clicked.
Cool. So
in test evolve, we use water, which is a wrapper around Selenium that we've mentioned before. So test-evolve.browser is the water browser, and to expose the actual Selenium driver underneath, it's just .driver. So this is kind of, just executing, just using the Selenium driver underneath. Mm-hmm. So I'm using find element. We've got the ID of clickable div, which is, you can see here from the page. That's how we're identifying the button underneath. And then just calling click on that. So when I run the test, what will happen is it'll open the page. It will try and click on this clickable div immediately, because we've got no waits, no nothing. It's just going to try and click on it. So this is the Selenium way of doing it. The water way is very similar syntax. Effectively, test-evolve.browser. Actually, we can see, so immediately the test has failed. And we can see the element click intercepted error here. Exactly the same code in water would do the same thing. So in this case, we're looking for a button with an ID of div and then .click.
Nice.
That's effectively the same code.
Yep.
So I'll run that. Connect to the device again, and we should run into exactly the same problem. So there's a couple of solutions that I see really commonly to this kind of issue. There you go, it just failed straight away. Mm-hmm. So the first thing that I see in lots and lots of reviews is people just adding waits, or some kind of time to wait until the thing is out of the way. Yeah. So sleep for 15 seconds and then try and click on the button. And that will work. I mean, if you wait for something to happen for long enough, then your test will pass. Mm-hmm. But the purpose isn't to get the test to pass. The purpose is to make sure the requirements are working, make sure the user can interact with the website. So if we wait here for 15 seconds, the annoying div is going to be out of the way. The user will be able to click the button, or Selenium in this case will be able to click the button, and the test will pass. There we go. See, the updated button was clicked. Yeah, there's lots of reasons why we don't want to do that. So, for example, if they remove the animation, we now have a test that just waits for 15 seconds for nothing. Mm-hmm. They might shorten the duration, so this might only need to be 5 seconds, and then waiting for 10 extra seconds. But also, a lot of this code will be reusable. So if you put a sleep anywhere in it, then it's adding that onto every single test that you're running potentially. Yeah. And that reusable code could be present in thousands of front end tests, which will just is not useful in any way. So in reviews I always try and discourage that behavior.
So when that was even though it's 15 seconds, right, it looked like it was still maybe partially obscured. So I guess Selenium with the XY coordinates is going straight for the center of the thing it's trying to find. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, it will always click on the center of the button unless you specified elsewhere.
Yeah.
Okay. You could potentially say you want it to happen in the top left. In fact, that could be another workaround. The top left of a particular thing that's obscured might just be in frame, and you can tell it to to click on that, but that's not how a user would
No,
enter the website. They wouldn't even know the button was there.
I didn't even know we could do that, to be honest. That's interesting.
I know with the sleeps as well, it's something we've seen in our regression pack, where you think 10 seconds sleep on one test isn't a lot, but if that step's being used by, say, 100 tests, then those 15 seconds can quickly get multiplied into 10, 15 minutes on a large scale, and that's something that we've found has increased our test runs before. So we have been looking for different ways to get around it.
Yeah, I mean, it's universally accepted that using sleeps is not the best approach. I think we can all agree on that. I think it's one thing when you're developing your tests just to understand how the application's behaving, but you absolutely don't want to leave that type of stuff in your code once you're running that through your CI pipeline at all.
No.
So potentially another way around it, which I see people use, is effectively to execute the JavaScript of the button underneath. And then call the click event on it. So the way we do that this is water. So we would just be executing a script and we'd be passing it the element that we want to perform this bit of JavaScript on.
Mm-hmm.
And all it's doing is calling the click function. So that will bypass any Selenium things where it's saying anything is obscured. It will literally just execute the JavaScript underneath. And I just ran that and you can see it was passed. It clicked on the button immediately.
Right.
In water, there's a nice wrapper for that as well, which is just putting an exclamation mark on the end of your .click command. Again, this is a way to do it. If you're really not worried about the user journey, the actual end user experience. So, for example, an integration framework like Cypress might not care that a user can't see a button. It still just wanted to click it and make sure it functionally works.
Well, I guess it's kind of serves the purpose of allowing the test to continue, but even though we're sitting there calling it .click, it's strictly speaking, it's not really clicking on it, is it?
It's not. And I think, the creators of Selenium have obviously got this element click intercepted error. I think it's there for a reason, and it's a very good reason, and that is the user would not be able to do this thing.
Yeah, okay.
So I think, we shouldn't be looking to work around or bypass this thing using sleeps or using this approach. We should be trying to behave exactly as a user would.
Yep.
And that's why we've come up with sort of an idea that works most of the time. It's not applicable all the time, but if you know that there is something that's going to be in the way and you have to wait for it to be there, and you're happy with that, the business is happy with that, then we can do a solution where we try for a certain amount of time, and even if there's errors, we catch those errors and we try again effectively. We can do that for as long as we want to set. So we've created a module called try with, which is available in test evolve, but I'll show you how it works so you could use it in potentially any framework. We're setting a timeout and we're just doing exactly the same thing as we were doing before. We're just trying to click on the button. So I'll run that. The try with hook, the code might look a little bit complicated, but all it's doing is looping through. It's looping through, it's catching any errors. And we can watch it happening here. So as soon as it's able to click on the center of the button, it'll say button was clicked. There we go.
Okay, yeah.
And then, the test passes, but the test passes in the same way as a user would have been able to complete that task. So what we've got here, we've got the time, try with time. We've got a timeout that we can set. We've got what's called a sleep, so something inside here to pause between each iteration. You don't want to, say you're doing this against an API endpoint or something, you don't want to absolutely hammer the endpoint until it becomes completely unusable, or there's you start getting 500 errors.
Yeah.
You want to put a space in between, so this could be 0.1 seconds.
Yep.
And what it will do is it will sleep in between each iteration for the certain amount of time. We've also added in refresh. There's a potential if you're searching for a front end that doesn't update dynamically and you're searching for some data. If you wanted, say, to give it a certain amount of time in between each check, then you say, okay, every 5 seconds I want to check the data, but you might need to refresh the browser to update the data. So you set refresh to true, sleep to 5, and then a timeout for however long you'd want to wait for that data, so 60 seconds, something like that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So what effectively this is doing, all of this is just deprecated stuff, raising if you haven't provided a block. But if you do provide a block is basically the thing you're passing to the function. So in our case, it's just click. So it'll execute the click, and that's what yield means. It's executing the code that you pass to it.
Okay.
And then it will catch any error here. And then, so that would be, in our case, the element intercepted error.
Yep.
It will check the time just to see if it's expired or not. Log some console output. If you've got that configured, you might want to know every attempt what it's got, what kind of error it's got. And it will sleep. It will refresh if you configured that, and then it will retry. It will only retry if it's not timed out.
Gotcha.
If it's timed out, then the actual error is raised, and a message is put to the console. So that's the basic structure of it. And as you can see, it works pretty well for us. We've got a couple of variations on it. We've got attempts. So that's if you want to say, you don't want a specific timeout, you want to try a certain number of times for that thing to be able to perform this function. So you pass through attempts, let's say 10 attempts. And then you might want to say, okay, between each attempt, sleep for 1 second. So the whole thing will take 10 seconds, and you can kind of calculate that. And then we've still got exactly the same stuff. So you could refresh the browser as well if you wanted, but that's a slightly different way of phrasing it. I prefer setting a timeout, because then it kind of mirrors the user experience. You're saying, well, if it doesn't appear within 5 seconds, then that's causing me a problem. Maybe there needs to be a bug, that kind of thing.
I was looking at attempts, actually thinking, okay, well, how would you decide? Do you set 3? Do you set 5? Do you set 10? I guess not a risk, but a potential downside with that is that you're just really pulling an arbitrary number out of the air for a number of attempts to try. But I think the way you just phrased this makes a lot more sense. As a user, you'd be willing to sit there for a certain amount of time before you gave up on that process. So yeah, no, I think that's probably better.
Yeah, and I think it is key. As a tester, you want to raise any concerns. So this annoying div that was covering the page is not okay. You want to speak to the business, and if they're expecting it, then that's fine. But you can show them this and say, okay, there needs to be a bug. Like, should I raise a bug? If not, we can work around it. That's not a problem in our automation. It's not a blocker. But it should be driven by a decision from the business. So always be vocal about these things. But if we have to work around them, we can as automated testers. And they will be able to provide a sensible timeout. If the user is unable to click on the button within 10 seconds, then my functional test should fail because it's not usable. It's a UX issue that you need to raise. And the last one we have, which is also pretty useful, is until. So in this case, we pass through something that is either going to be true or false. So it might be, let's check if this button is enabled. And this would be until.
Okay.
And then, yeah, so you can still specify a timeout. So, 5 seconds. So we're waiting until this thing is true before proceeding with our test. I think that's a really powerful one as well. That's, with Marina's example, you're waiting for something to disappear before you can proceed.
Yeah.
In that case, we were just checking it, and most of the time, instantly it will. But if you click on a close button and it takes 5 seconds to disappear for whatever, there's an animation or something.
Yeah.
This is the answer. You're checking for the existence or whether it's obscured, or very useful.
And there are certain things, and we see this again within our own testing that we do with kind of third-party integrations. If you've got like a Stripe payment mechanism or something like that, and you are absolutely dependent on getting a response from that service, and that could be a massive variable. And essentially, you're looking for a modal to disappear or part of the process to complete. That could be invaluable in that kind of situation.
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, to summarize, I think kind of we've shown this working. I'll just run it one more time. But yeah, as soon as the annoying div is out of the way to the point where it can be clicked, the Selenium will then click it, and you can continue with your test. I think that's the way we should be solving these issues. But yeah, I think end-to-end testing, when you're using a framework like Test Evolve, it should always be performed on the basis of how an end user would be interacting with your product. Always asking the business, making sure that when we're developing tests, these things, we're not just working around them, getting the test to pass. That's not the goal. It's to make sure that the requirements are met. We shouldn't bypass or circumvent or work around any Selenium errors. They're there for a reason. We just need to, work with them, not against them, and not trying to work around them. And also, I think this proves that UAT is important. Like having someone, our automated test might pass, but the UX is not what the business wants. So UAT is important to be able to actually see an animation is taking too long and change that.
Yeah, that's a massively important point, isn't it? And I know this is not automation specific at all, but yeah, as testers, okay, get your test passing, deal with things as you need to do, but it should be bigger than that. Quality is not just about, does this test eventually pass? It's also about, as you saying, would I willingly sit there through that experience as a user? All right, we're probably all getting used to testing the kind of apps that we use ourselves on a daily basis, right? So you know what you would willingly sit there or you wouldn't, what experience you would endure or what you wouldn't. So yeah, I think it's important to have that kind of perspective as well. Yeah, awesome. I've got a couple of questions if I can actually.
Sure.
So in fact, so you showed this click intercepted error within our own test results platform, right? So it's something that we see. I guess this is high up there on one of the most commonly experienced kind of Selenium errors, right? The root cause we saw was basically something being in the way of something else. Is that 9 times out of 10, is that always going to be the cause of this kind of click intercepted error, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, there's other things it could be. There tends to be spinners on websites these days because you don't want the user to see dynamic content loading in the background. It's better to have a spinner over the top. So an element might be on the page, but the page hasn't kind of finished dynamically loading. So they'll put a spinner over the top, and that will cover the button, but the button is there. And that's certainly, something that we've seen previously when we've added spinners. The automated tests don't love that. So this is a way to cope with that. And then with the notifications as well, I think that's another good example. There's just the page is loaded, everything is in the state it needs to be, but the user needs to be alerted to something happening. So there's a notification on the screen that is going to disappear, but someone's configured that to be there for a certain amount of time. So that is completely fine, but it will interfere with your automated test.
Yeah, I think another interesting one that we came across for our testing was we had a welcome splash screen that popped up for first-time users, and whilst that was present, so any modal or iframe can sometimes prevent you from interacting with the rest of the page, and sometimes see the element click intercept if there is something like a pop-up there as well.
Yeah, nice. So Water offers it kind of offers a dot obscured method as well. Have you seen that, Mark, in your travels? Have you ever used that?
I love dot obscured, yeah. So that would be another way of doing it. So you could say try with for until after a timeout, 10 seconds. Say this browser button obscured question mark. Yeah, in Ruby question marks, brilliant. Yeah. So obscured. So obviously you'd say not obscured, and then that would solve your problem. So you're saying, can I interact with this button? I can't if it's obscured, so I'll wait until it's not obscured. Effectively, is how it reads.
And going back to one of your earlier points, I think is when you said the first thing you see is people kind of adding, X seconds sleep. The other thing, I've certainly been guilty of it myself in the past, is trying combinations of these things, right? So waiting for something to be, waiting for it to exist, waiting for it to be present, to be enabled, to be visible, and you're just, you're not dealing with the fundamentals of the way the application is behaving. You're trying as you said, you fall into this trap of desperately trying to get this test to pass so that it's one less failing test you have to deal with on your report the next morning. But it's just a sticking plaster solution, right? It's not the ultimate way of dealing with it, is it?
That's it, and just increasing timeouts and just trying to get past it. Yeah, it's not helping anyone.
Yeah, which kind of takes me to my final point, because and again, I guess you don't see this with every organization or every framework, but another common thing someone might do here would be to just rerun a failed test in its entirety at the end of the run. So you have 100 tests and 90 of them pass. A fairly common thing would be to have an extension of that job or the next part of the CI pipeline, which says, right, okay, we'll take those 10 tests that failed and run all of them again. So it's quite obvious to me that having something like this within the test, whether you do it 3 times or time out 10 seconds, this has got to be a much more effective and a much faster way of adding a little bit of tolerance, but not just kind of bullishly trying to rerun the test or force it again a second time and a third time when you're trying to run that entire test. This has got to be much more effective, right?
Yeah, I mean, so we do rerun tests. I think there are certain arguments for that, maybe a slow running test environment, that kind of thing. But I don't think it should ever be to solve this kind of problem. This is the perfect place to do that.
Okay.
And I think if you do have a test that fails the second time or the third time, then there's still something that a tester needs to look at. It's not the big success that, okay, we're at 100% now. Yeah, agreed.
Nice. I think what I like is the console output as well. So if you're looking at your logs, this isn't necessarily a sign that you've got to look at anything, but if something starts to fail or something's starting to take longer, or you start to consider this to be somewhat of a flaky test, this, if you get into the detail here, it does give you an indication of what Selenium's having to do to deal with that particular element. So it's kind of useful, isn't it?
It's really useful. I think as well, it will catch any error. So obviously we focused on the element click intercepted error today. But there could be stale element references. There could be other Selenium errors that are causing the issue. To see how that changes over time, the logging is really important. And so I'd leave it switched on when you were, debugging a test, or when you can't necessarily watch the test because it's in a CI pipeline. Having this level of detail is really important. And you can say, okay, well, for the first 5 seconds, it was element click intercepted. Then it couldn't find the button. So that would, over time, it might change the issue. It's obscured for a little bit and then it's disappeared, that kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely. Nice. All right, great example. Thank you very much. Anyone else? Any other questions?
I just have one for you, Mark. When's your app available for public use?
I'll release the source code any day now. Look at that. Incredible.
That would be an annoying diff. Very good.
Yeah, so Mark, could this be if you were running tests through a pipeline as well, and potentially when running through the pipeline, things were taking slightly longer to load? Would this be a good way of dynamically handling that? So when you run it locally, it passes fine, but when you run it through a pipeline, it might not. But equally, you don't want to be waiting as long as you do for a pipeline test when you run it locally. So the attempts and the timeouts help just to minimize wasted time, depending where you're running it. Is that fair to say? Or?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. So obviously, there's global timeouts you can set, and you could set them per environment. So if for example, you've got a UAT environment which is production-like and everything's great, then you set the timeouts to be low because then it probably has failed within that time. But for a slow-running, let's say a dev environment or something where it hasn't got the resources, you could pass in configuration that's environment-specific for these numbers, and then run it that way. That's an interesting one.
Okay.
Good question. I think, that would be the way to handle that if you wanted to. But I mean, I think if you have a baseline and it's failing because of a timeout, then you have to question the performance of the environment and what you can do about that. But the option is always there to increase timeouts. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking as well, because obviously you can wrap this around a few lines of code, right? So in this case, it's just around a dot click, right? It's just a button we're trying to click. But if you're on some kind of any kind of form that effectively clears itself after an unsuccessful submission, you might need to group a few lines of code together, right? You might need to re-deal with a couple of fields, a couple of input fields before a button click. So I guess you've got to think about the state of the application after the thing that you're trying to do has failed, whether that's part of the problem or not.
So you can pass a block like this. You can run multiple commands. So like you say, you could set text fields and click buttons with a whole lot. If there's an exception during any of it running, then it will try again.
Right. Okay.
But yeah, you would have to bear in mind that, okay, I've set this to hello. Will that affect the next time round? If you maybe were trying to do something after the click, it might have clicked it, but then you get an error in the next line.
Yeah.
You don't want to try and click a button because that will no longer be present. So yeah, absolutely. You want to use this just for small chunks of code that can be grouped together, and the state of the application isn't changed within it. Would you
ever add assertions within this as well? Raise error, positive or negative, I suppose.
Absolutely, it's a really good point. Yeah. So say you click a button and you expect something like the text, for example.
Yeah.
I could move this exception here inside here. So it will click it. Maybe I could reprogram this so that on the third click, the message will be changed. So yeah, then you click, you check this thing, but we'll raise this error. And because we're raising this error, we'll loop back again. It'll log to the output and saying the button was not clicked.
Yeah.
And then when it gets to the third time, it'll click it again, and the assertion will be true, and then you can move on.
Nice. So it's kind of equally useful for, just navigation itself, but also then, checking a certain thing that's pertinent to the test in question, I suppose.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. That's really nice. I like that. I'm definitely going to use try with until more than I ever have done. So it's,
good choice.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Anything else, anyone? I think we're good. All right. Well, yeah, thank you, guys. I think we'll call it a wrap for today. I can see us definitely doing more of these sessions moving forward. But yeah, it's just some really nice, fairly introductory examples. But nonetheless, these are, almost anyone that's working with Selenium, and regardless of language and framework type, there's a decent chance you've come across these at some point in your automation career. So yeah, I can see us doing lots more of these. Yeah, but for now, guys, thank you very much. Good forum. Enjoyed that a lot. Learned a lot. And until the next time, yeah, thanks very much. We'll see you then.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.